welcome to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. If you want to feel small, think about supermassive black holes or how galaxies operate. Maybe ponder the origins of the cosmos itself. Little old mankind found a new tool for understanding all of those things, a breakthrough. But first,
we cannot let this decision be the last word.
A cosmic shift in law as the Supreme Court rejects affirmative action in college admissions. A man with weapons and threats arrested in former President Barack Obama's neighborhood. And plane travel has been a supermassive black hole in some regions. Will things get better for 4th of July?
For some folks where the destination is within driving distance, maybe that might be the best choice.
But we begin our report here in the nation's capital. The Supreme Court has upended decades of legal precedent, this time dissolving affirmative action in colleges. Thursday's 6-3 ruling means universities can no longer use race as a blanket factor when choosing students. Liberal justices who dissented argued affirmative action helps, quote, equalize educational opportunities. On both sides, justices accused each other of a fundamental misunderstanding of the American promise, American history, and the state of race in American life. CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett has our report.
Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts said admission policies at Harvard University and the University of North Carolina violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race, Roberts wrote. Many universities have for too long done just the opposite. In a scathing dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor accused the court majority of ignoring history and precedent. The court cements a superficial rule of colorblindness as a constitutional principle in an endemically segregated society where race has always mattered and continues to matter. At the White House, President Biden criticized the conservative majority.
This is not a normal court.
And said the nation must find a new way to achieve diversity in college admissions.
What I propose for consideration is a new standard, where colleges take into account the adversity a student has overcome when selecting among qualified applicants.
The opinion also exposed deep personal and ideological divisions within the court. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the first black woman to serve on the High Court, wrote in her dissent, quote, "With let them eat cake obliviousness, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces color blindness for all by legal fiat." Clarence Thomas, the court's other black justice, responded, quote, "Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all blacks as victims."
We won't go back!
Outside the court, students and civil rights leaders assembled to protest.
I think in this moment in time, it's important for every institution, from colleges to corporations, to commit to pledge to diversity no matter what.
Ed Bloom, the president of Students for Fair Admissions, brought the case to the court, arguing race should not factor into admissions decisions at all.
Ending racial preferences in college admissions is an outcome that the vast majority of all Americans of all races will celebrate.
CBS News polling shows that 70% of Americans think race should not be allowed as a factor in college admissions. But statistics indicate that in states that have banned affirmative action, such as California and Michigan, admissions for black and Latino students have fallen dramatically at their most selective universities. Shruti Kumar, a student at Harvard, opposes today's court ruling.
I think the idea that our society can be colorblind is a silly one. We don't live in a perfect meritocracy.
And Major Garrett joins us from outside the Supreme Court. And I'm also joined by CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian here in the studio. Major, the Biden administration seemed ready for this, immediately announcing plans to promote diversity measures in colleges and universities. What do you think the practical effect of those measures will be, and what, of course, is the political effect?
Well, of course, there was an immediate evaluation of the Biden White House after this historic decision. What would it say, and would it have any ability to articulate a way forward? You might recall, John, after the Dobbs decision about a year ago, many Democrats and progressives were unhappy with the Biden administration, feeling it did not fill that void, at least not immediately. Now, in the White House's defense, they said at the time it was harder to point a way forward on abortion rights because that would be decided by 50 states with different political attitudes, different approaches. But on affirmative action, they believe there is a way to plot a way forward, in part because colleges themselves and those who are applying want to see diverse student bodies. How to achieve that? So the president gave voice to means by which that could happen, saying colleges can, among other things, look at financial background, look at the grit and determination necessary for a particular applicant to get to the point where they were qualified to enter that college or university. And that could be part of a broader non-race-based assessment of their qualifications, and that could, he said, build out or continue to build out what he believes most colleges and universities want to achieve, which is diverse student bodies.
Nicole, Major just laid out what the White House is trying to do. What did you hear in terms of a reaction on Capitol Hill? And is anybody talking about legislation or a congressional fix to this ruling?
Well, reaction, as you can imagine, was pretty much split along party lines, with many Republicans praising this decision, saying that it was long overdue, that this will make the college admissions process fair. Democrats, on the other hand, really decrying this decision, some saying that they were at a loss for words, calling this decision disgusting. I was on a call earlier today with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, also known as the Tri-Caucus, and some of the ideas that they brought up. Well, first and foremost, they point out that this is going to be very tricky for Congress, that they can't really overrule a constitutional finding. And so, therefore, it's really about enforcement. They were calling, for instance, on the Attorney General and other federal agencies, for that matter, to really enforce any type of discriminatory practices, perhaps that may be found at a given college or university, and to be very aggressive in pursuing those types of cases. They also talked about this issue of legacy-based admissions, and I think that's a space to watch. Whether or not Congress can really do a lot on that front remains to be seen, but these lawmakers were very critical about how can the Supreme Court strike down race-based admissions, yet somebody whose parent went to a college or university, somebody who donates to a university, can get in significant numbers, and how can those disparities be addressed? So those are a couple of the ideas. Obviously, Congress is out right now, so these lawmakers said they'll probably regroup once Congress gets back in session, but it really does beg this debate in terms of, what happens next, because we know there are some colleges and universities that already enforce these race-neutral policies, which will probably now get a closer look in light of this decision. But as Major pointed out, there are similarly in other states these programs where, as a result, we've seen a precipitous decline in the number of Black and Latino students that are being admitted to colleges and universities. So it is something that will have to be rectified not only through Congress, but again, that's why you see the administration trying to be out front on this.
Major, before we let you go, what did you think the president meant when he said this is not a normal court?
Well, we have a helpful explanation from the president himself. Later on this afternoon, he said exactly what he meant by that. And what he meant, John, is that he said this court does not follow precedent. And when it doesn't follow precedent, what often happens is injuries are inflicted on underrepresented communities in this country. And in the case of affirmative action, to pick up on a point Nicole just made, Michigan and California have real live experiences. Both states have excellent public universities, and they found after they banned race as a factor in college admissions, both in California and Michigan, those elite institutions in those states saw a precipitous decline in Black and Latino admissions. And they've worked tirelessly, they say, to try to find ways to work around that. And they haven't been successful, meaning they haven't moved the numbers back up to where they were before race was eliminated as a possible consideration in admissions. So this is very difficult terrain, but what the president meant was, when it comes to precedent, this court will ignore it, and when it has ignored it, he said, has inflicted harms on underrepresented minority communities in this country. John?
All right. Major Garrett, Nicole, Killian, thank you for being with us. And later this hour, we'll look at the details of the court's decision and the dissenting opinions. We'll also hear from a UNC grad who testified in one of the cases. In another highly anticipated case before the court, the justices ruled unanimously to strengthen religious rights in the workplace. The issue involved a postal worker who quit his job rather than work on Sundays when he attended church. The court agreed with earlier rulings that found employers must make reasonable accommodations for an employee's religious views, unless that accommodation imposes a undue hardship, such as substantial increased costs. The postal worker's case now goes back to a lower court, which will have to decide his claim based on the Supreme Court's ruling. The TSA says Thursday is the busiest day of air travel since the pandemic began in early 2020. And all this busyness means there's some messiness. As of Thursday evening, more than 5,000 flights were delayed nationwide. Chris Van Cleve is in Phoenix with more on the potential obstacles people could see this holiday weekend.
Tonight, the 4th of July holiday weekend has a potential record number of Americans hoping for independence from travel troubles.
It's a lot. Hopefully we make our flight.
I'm hoping that I can get to Florida without any delays.
AAA predicts the number of holiday flyers will soar 11% over last year. But the rush comes as airlines recover from a series of storms that delayed about 45,000 flights and forced the cancellation of over 8,000 more since Saturday. United Airlines is the hardest hit, canceling around 14% of its flights just today. And in Denver, a sea of bags wait to be claimed as a flood of passengers try to get somewhere else.
My phone dinged saying that my flight was canceled.
Madeline Hardy left New York City on Amtrak, avoiding the airport.
Since what's going on, I'm happy to be taking the train.
On the roads, more than 43 million are expected to drive, surpassing the pre-pandemic 4th of July record, with gas prices on average more than $1.30 a gallon cheaper than last year. Welcome news for Dennis Sandhurst, who's hauling a camper outside Los Angeles.
We definitely have a little more money now to spend on the tourist stuff.
And this moment, after a passenger from Phoenix left her passport on that plane, these British Airways pilots in the terminal got a hold of the guys on the flight deck, who dropped her purse out the cockpit window as they pushed back for departure. Vacation saved.
Amazing! She's gonna get her passport.
That's great. Chris Van Cleve joins me now. Chris, what's the situation like where you are?
Well, Phoenix has pretty blue sky flying days most of the year. So the problems for folks flying out of Phoenix really have to do with where they're going. We have seen thunderstorms in Chicago earlier today, thunderstorms in Denver. There's some visibility and basically a traffic jam at some of the airports on the East Coast. So, it really depends not only where you're flying from, but where you're flying to as things are trying to get back in order. Now, most airlines, John, have made a lot of very good progress today, and we've seen many of the cancellations come down. Delays remain high. Some of that is definitely driven by weather. United Airlines is the exception. They continue to really struggle today as they're resetting their operations, but the airline says it's making good progress and expects things to come in line in the coming days, weather permitting.
And what are airlines doing to deal with all of this?
Well, so couple of things. If your flight's been canceled, there aren't a lot of extra seats. The TSA expects tomorrow to be perhaps a post-pandemic record number of people coming through checkpoints. I looked at flights between New York and Chicago for tomorrow. I couldn't find a single open seat on any airline. So reaccommodating people is going to be a challenge. That's why you're hearing people getting rebooked for Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. The other thing airlines can do is more proactively cancel the flight early when they know there's going to be a problem, so people don't get stranded at an airport. So at least they don't leave the house, come here to find out they're not going anywhere.
Exactly. Chris Van Cleve in Phoenix. Thanks a lot, Chris.
Sure thing.
It smells like a ham hock is cooking somewhere down here in Washington, where we are some of the 100 million Americans under air quality alerts stemming from smoke from Canadian wildfires. Officials in affected areas are urging people to limit their time outdoors to avoid breathing unhealthy air. Our Scott McFarland brings us the latest from the thick haze in the nation's capital.
Washington, D.C. today had some of the most polluted air in the world. D.C. and Maryland urged face coverings and for seniors to minimize their time outside. At the Washington Monument, Livia Pecos, visiting from Massachusetts, was masked.
And it's like way foggier than it would be on a normal day.
But you still wanted to make the trip today?
Yes, because we want to see the monuments because this is our last full day here, so.
Nearly a third of the population of America is feeling at least some impact. In Chicago, city officials urge people to limit driving, and they opened some air-conditioned shelters.
Tell it smells like a campfire.
Residents said the air smelled like a barbecue pit as it blanketed Pittsburgh, and coaches canceled swim practice near St. Louis.
They can get into some pretty rigorous activities, so we didn't want to expose them to the air quality at that time.
In the South, heat is the big issue, as more than 44 million people are under an excessive heat warning. Janet Shamlian is in Houston.
For construction workers like these and so many others, this is their office. There is no relief whatsoever from the heat. Right now, the surface temperature, where they've been working all day, has measured 123 degrees.
Elsewhere, home security video captured a delivery driver overcome by heat. Amazon says the worker is okay. At New Orleans Police Headquarters, it's hotter inside than out. The air conditioning broken as the heat index hits 113 degrees.
Back in D.C., satellite images show this cycle of smoke continues, with more wildfires flaring up in Quebec and making the march south through the U.S. East Coast.
And Scott McFarland joins me now. He's outstanding in this. Scott, how's this smoke affected travelers here in D.C.?
Spent the last 20 July 4th weekends here on the National Mall in some way, shape, or form. I could tell you unequivocally, there's just a fraction of the normal tourist visitor population here today than we normally see. It may be a one-day thing. This smoke is going to shift south, likely sometime soon, but you can just feel it literally and metaphorically. This is having an impact on people. Roughly a third to a half of the folks we saw near the memorials and monuments had either some type of mask on, John, or were limiting their time, clearly moving quickly to get away from all this, even though they paid the money, took that difficult flight, and came here to Washington for this holiday week.
And tell me, Scott, about the local government warnings about all this, and if are any of them setting a deadline? In other words, when this is going to clear?
This will go at least through the night tonight and partly through the day tomorrow. The local school systems that have summer programs have ordered the kids indoors. All those summer camps, and they are everywhere across America, but in this area, they've moved indoors, or they've canceled some of the practices, some of the outdoor portions. You can imagine a soccer camp moving indoors. Not the best case scenario, but better than nothing. There's also the issue of keeping seniors inside. There are shuttle services to get them places they need to go. There are indoor air-conditioned shelters to make sure people can keep the windows closed and stay cool. This is a short-term issue, but it's a short-term issue for now, John. This cycle continues in Canada. There's an expectation this is coming back here eventually.
Yeah, short-term issue in a time when everybody wants to be outdoors. Scott McFarland in Washington. Thanks a lot, Scott.
Thank you.
Seattle man is facing charges after allegedly making threats against a former president. We'll have details on the alleged plan to blow up Barack Obama's home here in Washington. And another day of unrest in France, why tens of thousands of officers are patrolling the streets. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. District of Columbia police have arrested a man suspected of threatening to blow up former President Barack Obama's home here in Washington. Authorities say he had the materials necessary to make an explosive device similar to a Molotov cocktail. And as CBS News' Jeff Pegues explains, the suspect also had an open warrant on January 6th related charges.
Law enforcement officials tell CBS News that 37-year-old Taylor Taranto was spotted in former President Obama's Washington neighborhood this afternoon. When police approached, he ran toward Mr. Obama's home before being arrested with multiple weapons and explosive materials. Officials were concerned because Taranto had been live streaming threats in recent days that have since been deleted. His conversion van parked nearby was adorned with American flags and the words "Patriots Win" written on one of the windows. Taranto was being sought by the FBI and Capitol Police for his role in the January 6th attacks.
It's very troubling. Anytime you have an individual who is focused on an event like January the 6th, who is in a vehicle, who has apparently the materials to make Molotov cocktails, and he's in the close proximity to a former president.
And Jeff Pegues joins me now. Jeff, how much do we know about the suspect and his connection to January 6th?
Well, we're still looking into some of the details. We're getting more information from our sources. But what we're hearing right now is while he's from Washington State, he's been spending a lot of time here in D.C. In fact, our CBS News source is telling us that he has been spotted near the D.C. jail, living out of that conversion van that you saw in that report. And investigators say that is, of course, where January 6 defendants are being held. So he's been spotted near that jail. And some of the threats that he was making online, according to investigators, he was making and live streaming from around that D.C. jail.
And since the suspect already had an open warrant, do we know if authorities were actively trying to locate him? It sounds like he wasn't doing very much to hide himself.
Well, remember how massive this investigation is already. In connection with January 6th, more than 1,000 people have been arrested and charged. So was he on their radar? Yes, he was. They were actively looking for him. According to our sources, he showed up here, and that's when they were able to put two and two together, match him to the profile of the person that they were looking for.
Jeff Pegues in Washington. Thanks very much, Jeff. Rapper Travis Scott will not be criminally charged in the 2021 fatal crowd crush at his concert in Houston. 10 people died during the Astro World Festival, and hundreds of others were hurt. The grand jury's decision not to indict Scott is the culmination of a 19-month investigation. Scott's attorney says the decision is a great relief for the rapper, who he says never encouraged concertgoers to do anything that resulted in people getting hurt. There have been days of unrest in France after the deadly police shooting of a 17-year-old boy. Tens of thousands of officers took to the streets Thursday in an attempt to restore order, but piles of garbage and vehicles were set ablaze as the sun set over the southern city of Toulouse. French prosecutors say the officer who allegedly pulled the trigger faces a preliminary charge of voluntary homicide. Former Vice President Mike Pence made a surprise visit to Ukraine Thursday. He met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to affirm his support for the country in its ongoing fight against Russia. Pence is the first 2024 GOP presidential candidate to visit Zelensky. He also toured Bucha, a town that's seen the mass murder of civilians by Russian forces. Pence said the U.S. needs to, quote, make sure we provide the Ukrainian military with what they need to push back on and defeat Russian aggression. In 1916, Albert Einstein predicted gravitational waves. In 2015, scientists spotted one for the first time. But now scientists think they might have caught a mind-boggling big set of waves. In 2015, the first rattle in space-time that was clocked came from the collision of two star-sized black holes. But scientists believe that for the first time, they've got evidence of sweeping waves formed by thousands of pairs of supermassive black holes across the universe. It took researchers about 15 years of effort to find evidence for this sea of gravitational waves that jiggle the Earth. In a new technique, researchers used radio telescopes to monitor tiny variations in rhythmic flashes of light from a network of dead stars until they could detect the thrumming of waves. The discovery could help us upgrade our understanding of the very structure of the universe from almost the moment it started. The Supreme Court, in a stroke with its rulings on affirmative action, changed the way colleges select students. We'll talk to a UNC graduate who testified in one of those cases. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. Welcome back to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. Here's a look at our top stories. More than 100 million Americans faced air quality alerts Thursday due to wildfire smoke from Canada. Cities, including Chicago, Washington, D.C., and Detroit, had some of the worst air quality in the world. As of Thursday, Canada had 500 active fires. Nearly half are considered out of control. Millions of Americans are hitting the roads and the skies for the 4th of July holiday weekend, but widespread flight delays and cancellations are still leaving thousands of people stranded. The TSA predicts more than 2.8 million passengers will fly on Friday alone. The Supreme Court ended this systemic use of race as a factor in college admissions on Thursday. According to Harvard, which is one of the schools involved in the litigation, more than 40% of universities consider race to some degree. The justices were split along ideological lines. For more on this, let's bring in Jess Braven. He's a Supreme Court correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Jess, let's just start with the easy part. Explain the court's decision to overturn affirmative action.
Sure. This was a 6-3 decision. The conservatives, led by Chief Justice John Roberts, found that it violates equal protection to consider race in college admissions, that there are very, very few times that the Constitution permits government agencies or entities that receive government funds from discriminating based on race. And diversity in college admissions no longer qualified. There were 3 dissenters, the liberals, who felt who took a very different view of what equality means under the Constitution. And we heard actually about 50 minutes of justices reading their opinions today, showing how seriously they took this issue.
As I understand it, the court had previously held in a previous ruling, I think from 2003, that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment did allow the use of race in university admission plans because there was this compelling interest. So is the new ruling that the court's previous view was wrong, or that the court's previous rule no longer holds because American society has moved on?
Chief Justice Roberts didn't exactly clarify that temporal question, but we know that he's never been a fan of any kind of racial preferences. And had he been on the court during earlier cases, he would have voted against them. In fact, he has voted against them in earlier cases. But whatever the rule was previously, it's no longer good. You're right. It goes back actually to 1978 in a case called Bakke, where the Supreme Court said that race could be used as a plus factor, not for quotas, or you couldn't have a separate track for minority admissions, but it could enter the mix of things like where you're from or whether you play an instrument or whether your parents went to Harvard, things like that, that the university could consider, and race could be a plus factor. Why? Not the student's right, the university's right. It's First Amendment right under academic freedom to create the kind of learning environment it wants. That is no longer the case. The Supreme Court said today that it's just too vague. It's not concrete. There's no way to evaluate when that goal is ever met. And it's time to end any kind of racial preferences, even for benign reasons, even if well-intentioned, the Chief Justice said.
You mentioned that the justices read from the bench. Justice Sotomayor wrote in her dissent, that the court was, quote, further entrenching racial inequality in education with its ruling. Was the back and forth and this reading from the bench, give us a sense of, was that particularly heated? Is that particularly out of place normally? Give us a sense of the kind of arguments firing back and forth between the two sides.
You know, it's not heated like you might find at a debate or something like that. But, the court has a kind of kabuki theater-like language where the justices can signal how seriously they take something, how concerned they are. The person who writes a majority opinion usually reads a summary of it. Here, the Chief Justice read a great deal of his opinion. Justice Clarence Thomas then read from his own very long concurring opinion about the use of race in admissions. And then Justice Sonia Sotomayor read for the longest period, almost half an hour, from her dissenting opinion. And when a justice reads a concurring opinion or a dissenting opinion, that's a signal that they take it very, very seriously. No other dissents have been read from the bench this term. So that's a message to the world that the losers are very, very unhappy with the decision and think that the majority was profoundly wrong. So that's the feeling there. But they're not throwing brickbats at each other. They don't even address each other. They talk past each other.
Yeah, which might be one of the one of the problems in life. But we'll leave that for another conversation. Jess, let me ask you this question, which confused me. Chief Justice Roberts said that applicants could still raise race in essays or some other way as part of their applications, and then universities could still factor that in their decision-making. Do I have that right?
Yes. I mean, this is the guidance that he gave. It's not that you have to ignore race altogether if that is relevant to a particular applicant. The thing that he focused on, and again, he and the 5 other conservatives, was that race cannot be an automatic benefit. All things being equal, you give the benefit to the Black or Hispanic applicant. That is no longer possible. But can an applicant describe in an essay or in an interview why how being Black or Hispanic or whatever race that might be affected their lives and how it created obstacles or inspired them or had some impact on them individually? That is okay. The Chief Justice wrote that if it's relevant to the individual applicant, they can raise it, and the universities can consider it like they could consider other things. What the university cannot do is simply say, this one is Black, we're going to put a sticker on that file, and automatically or at least implicitly assume things about that applicant without that person stating them.
Jess Braven, once again, walking us through this excellently with the Wall Street Journal. Thanks a lot, Jess.
You bet. Thanks, John.
And joining us now is Andrew Brennan. He's a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and he testified in a lower court hearing. Andrew, thank you for being with us. First off, what's your reaction to the decision today?
Thanks for having me. It's a pretty disappointing decision. When I was a student at Chapel Hill, the school was 11% Black in a state that was 22% Black. I had grown up my entire life in the South, but the first and second Confederate rallies I ever saw were on campus at UNC. That was the context in which this case was brought and why it was so important that students have their perspectives as part of the record. But today's ruling really threatens diversity efforts on campus and threatens to make higher education institutions less diverse.
And Andrew, was it those rallies that was the proximate cause for you to get involved, the specific rallies, or were there other factors that encouraged you to get involved in this case?
I think when I heard that the organization Students for Fair Admission was suing the university, I thought they were trying to address the fact that there were so few African-American men on campus at UNC. And so when I heard that actually they were suing the university because they thought we were too diverse, well, that just didn't sit well with me or many of my classmates whose experience at UNC more closely characterized racial hostility and racial isolation in the classroom than what the SFFA complaint alleges.
We just talked about how in his majority opinion, the Chief Justice said that universities can still take race into account if individual applicants bring it up in their applications to college. How do you think that would work out if you were back and applying for college again?
Well, I can actually tell you exactly how it would work out because I did talk about being Black in my college admissions essay. All throughout high school, I was called an Oreo, someone that was Black on the outside and white on the inside, just because I got good grades in school. And those experiences were important for me to reflect in my college admissions essay. What I hope the message is today is to student organizers, to campus advocates, to campus administrators, and to civil rights advocates. We need to be continuing to hold folks accountable for doing the most they can to ensure diversity on our college campuses, and not just for Black and brown students. All students benefit from having diverse campuses on colleges and universities.
What's your opinion of Justice Thomas said that in his concurring opinion that the Constitution is, quote, colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens? What do you make of that?
Well, the truth is the college admissions process can't be colorblind because our society isn't colorblind. I think Justice Sotomayor put it best in her dissent when she pointed out that because of today's decision, the police can consider my race when assessing my suspicion of a crime, but a college admissions officer can't consider my race when assessing my potential to contribute to a college campus. That's the sort of twisted and tortured logic that had to be employed in order to get to today's decision. And it is a step backwards in the fight to ensure diversity on our college campuses and throughout the institutions of our country.
UNC Chapel Hill graduate Andrew Brennan. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
In Florida, a former resource officer who was present at the 2018 Parkland school shooting but failed to confront the gunman was found not guilty on all charges. Prosecutors accused Scott Peterson of ignoring his training as the shooter killed 17 people inside Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. CBS News correspondent Manuel Bajorquez has more.
The defendant is not guilty. Former Florida Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson broke down in tears this afternoon, shaking with emotion, after he was found not guilty of felony child neglect, culpable negligence, and perjury. If convicted, Peterson could have faced nearly 100 years in prison.
We've got our life back after 4.5 years. Don't anybody ever forget this was a massacre on February 14th. The only person to blame was that monster.
Victims' parents were disappointed with the verdict.
Do you still believe that he put his life ahead of the others?
I think the evidence is clear. We saw the school video. We saw him retreat from the danger. We saw him not be curious about where the gunshots were coming from. We saw him run away from the threat rather than towards the threat.
17 people died during the massacre at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School on February 14, 2018. Peterson was the only armed school resource officer on duty. Prosecutors said he ignored his training to confront the gunman. Instead, he remained outside the building for more than 40 minutes. Peterson's attorney argued he could not tell where the shots were coming from. CBS News legal analyst Ricky Kleeman.
The reason that this case is so unprecedented is that in the context of this mass shooting, this man was prosecuted because he didn't do something. That's very rare indeed.
Peterson was the only person besides the shooter to be criminally charged. He decided not to take the stand during the trial. John?
Manuel Bajorquez in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Thank you. The Labor Department Thursday announced the largest drop in weekly unemployment claims in 20 months. Claims fell to 239,000, while the nation's unemployment rate is 3.7%. The Department of Commerce Thursday also announced the U.S. economy grew 2% in the first quarter of 2023. Fewer people losing their jobs and needing to file for unemployment benefits and strong growth bolster the Federal Reserve's case to keep raising interest rates in order to cool the economy, which Fed Chair Jerome Powell has signaled may happen before the end of the year. What would you do with almost $500,000? How about a room with a really good view? We'll have more ahead. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. The Justice Department has charged dozens of people in a nationwide crackdown on bogus medical claims and billings. Attorney General Merrick Garland is calling it one of the largest healthcare fraud schemes ever prosecuted by the Justice Department. Officials say the wrongdoing involved several healthcare and prescription drug schemes totaling more than $2.5 billion. One involved the submission of nearly $2 billion in false claims submitted to Medicare and Medicaid. Prosecutors say the fraudsters targeted vulnerable people and used the profits they made to make luxury purchases. The first vaccines to protect against the respiratory illness RSV will soon be available for older Americans. The CDC Thursday signed off on the shots for those ages 60 and over, clearing the way for them to be administered in the fall. Officials are advising people to discuss the vaccine first with their doctor to make sure it's right for them. The CDC says adults with chronic heart and lung disease or weakened immune systems are most at risk for RSV. The commercial space race is going faster. Virgin Galactic successfully completed its first flight with paying customers Thursday. Danya Bacchus has more for us.
3, 2, 1, release, release, release.
This is the moment when Virgin Galactic's rocket-powered plane released from the mothership in the latest leap for humankind.
Ignition, good control.
Rather than a vertical launch, a twin fuselage jet lifted the Unity spaceplane from the New Mexico runway and carried it to an altitude over 45,000 feet before releasing it to fly on its own. A built-in motor then propelled the ship to an altitude higher than 50 miles from Earth.
Our mission specialists have been cleared to unstrap and enjoy the zero-G experience.
Along with the two pilots and an astronaut trainer were the paying customers, 3 Italian researchers who spoke after the flight.
We did all the experiments that we were supposed to run, and we also had the opportunity to look outside and really enjoy the beauty of the view outside.
Virgin Galactic has said it plans to charge $450,000 per seat for out-of-this-world tourism.
Up to 4 passengers can be anything from space tourists to researchers, university endeavors, things like that. So really it's a matter of making money.
After the 72-minute total flight, the VSS Unity spaceplane came back to Earth.
And there's we'll stop.
Now joining Blue Origins and SpaceX, Virgin plans to offer monthly flights and already has hundreds of ticket holders waiting for their moment in space. Danya Bacchus, CBS News, Los Angeles.
History was made in Oakland Wednesday night. A Yankees pitcher threw the 24th perfect game in Major League Baseball history. We'll share the details after the break. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. Country star Kelsea Ballerini was hit in the face with a bracelet thrown by a fan while performing on stage Wednesday in Boise. Ballerini was in the middle of singing her song, "If You Go Down, I'm Going Down Too." She paused after being hit before walking off stage. Minutes later, Ballerini returned and continued playing. Later on Instagram, she told fans that she had been more scared than hurt and that she walked off stage to calm down. The NFL says it suspended 4 players Thursday for violating the league's gambling policy. Isaiah Rodgers and Rashad Berry of the Indianapolis Colts, as well as free agent Demetrius Taylor, received indefinite suspensions through at least the end of the 2023 season for betting on NFL games in 2022. Tennessee Titans right tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere, meantime, received a 6-game suspension for betting on non-NFL sports at the team's facility. The league has been cracking down on gambling violations recently. It suspended 5 other players in April. In baseball, Yankees pitcher Domingo Germán threw the 24th perfect game in Major League Baseball history. He achieved the feat during Wednesday's game against the Oakland A's. If you're not a baseball buff, a perfect game happens when a pitcher keeps all of the opposing team's batters from reaching base. No hits, no walks, and no hit by pitches. Germán is now the 4th Yankee in franchise history to do this, and he did it after being booed from the mound last Thursday for giving up 10 runs. This was also baseball's first perfect game since 2012. Up next, it's CBS Reports. For all of us here at CBS News Primetime, I'm John Dickerson. That's our report. Thank you for spending the hour with us.